The peaceful world of Krylon had never known war, at least not in the past 1,000 years. Its purple skies stretched far over the lush green lands where the alien race known as the Kryllians lived in harmony. They were a tall, graceful species with glowing blue skin and large, kind eyes. Their cities were clean and their technology advanced, but they had long forgotten the need for weapons or defense. Commander Vilas, the leader of Krylon's main city, stood in his control tower, gazing out at the horizon. It was a normal day. The sun was shining brightly, and the people below were going about their daily lives. Farmers worked in the fields, children played in the parks, and the air was filled with the sounds of peace. But all of that was about to change. Without warning, the sky turned dark. Huge, ominous ships appeared above the city, casting shadows over the streets. The ground shook as the ships came closer, their engines roaring loudly. The peaceful Kryllians looked up in fear and confusion. They had never seen anything like it before. Commander Vilas' heart raced. He quickly ordered his officers to scan the ships, but there was no response. "Who are they?" Vilas asked, his voice trembling slightly. No one had an answer. Suddenly, the ships began firing powerful beams of energy. The city shook violently as buildings crumbled under the attack. Panic spread through the streets like wildfire. The Kryllians, who had never faced such destruction, were terrified. Mothers grabbed their children and ran, while others fell to the ground in fear, unsure of what to do. "We're under attack," one of Vilas' officers shouted. "But we have no weapons," another responded in horror. Commander Vilas clenched his fists. The Kryllians had long ago decided to focus their energy on peace and growth, believing that no one would ever harm them. They had no military, no war machines, nothing to defend themselves. They were completely vulnerable. All citizens to the shelters. Vilas commanded through the loudspeakers, his voice echoing across the city. "Evacuate immediately." But as the streets filled with panicked Kryllians, it became clear that the shelters would not be enough. The enemy ships continued to fire, sending waves of destruction across the city. Whole buildings crumbled to dust, and the beautiful parks and gardens were burned to ash. Commander Vilas watched helplessly from his tower. "Why are they attacking us?" he whispered as he saw his people run for their lives. He had no answer. There had been no warning. No communication, just chaos. One of his officers, Lieutenant Dran, rushed over. "Commander, the enemy's technology is far beyond ours. We can't stop them. We have no choice but to send out a distress signal." Vilas nodded, though he felt a deep sense of shame. The proud Kryllians, always so sure of their strength and peace, were now weak and defenseless. They had no choice but to ask for help. "Send the signal," Vilas ordered. "We must try." Dran quickly began transmitting a distress message out into space, hoping that someone, anyone, would hear them. But deep down, Vilas wasn't sure if it would make any difference. Krylon was isolated, far from any known allies. Who would come to their aid? Outside, the panic worsened. Families were separated in the chaos, and the sounds of crying filled the air. The once orderly streets were now filled with terrified Kryllians running in every direction, not knowing where to go. The skies, once clear and beautiful, were now filled with smoke and fire as the invaders continued their relentless assault. Vilas looked at the screen in front of him. The enemy ships were massive, much larger than anything the Kryllians had ever seen. Their sleek black surfaces reflected no light, making them look like shadows in the sky. There was no sign of the beings inside them, only destruction left in their wake. "Commander, the signal has been sent," Dran said, though there was little hope in his voice. Vilas nodded but remained silent. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. His people, his planet, were all in danger, and there was nothing he could do. He could only hope that somewhere, out in the vastness of space, someone would hear their cry for help. The enemy ships showed no mercy. Their attacks grew stronger, and soon the entire city was in ruins. The Krillians who had managed to escape into the shelters huddled together, trembling in fear. Some whispered prayers to the stars, others simply cried, holding on to their loved ones. And still, the invaders kept coming, their ships slowly advancing, as if they had all the time in the world to destroy Krylon. Vilas stood alone in the control tower, staring at the devastation. His heart was heavy with guilt. He had failed his people. He had failed his world. But there was still a small spark of hope. Somewhere, someone might answer their call for help. Perhaps, just perhaps, they were not alone after all. The call for help. The once beautiful city of Krylon lay in ruins. The enemy ships hovered in the sky like dark clouds, ready to strike again. Commander Vilas stood at his control station, his eyes fixed on the transmission screen. The distress signal had been sent out to the far reaches of space, but no response had come yet. Time was running out, and the Krillians were growing more desperate by the minute. Inside the underground shelters, thousands of Krillians huddled together, terrified. The shelters were crowded and uncomfortable, but it was the only place they felt safe. Families clung to each other, while others stared blankly at the walls, lost in fear. The once vibrant Krillian race now looked broken, their hope fading with each passing second. Back in the control room, Lieutenant Dran approached Commander Vilas. "Commander, there's still no response to the signal," he said, his voice filled with worry. Vilas nodded, his jaw clenched. He knew that their chances of survival were slim if no one answered their call. "Keep trying," he replied, though he himself wasn't sure if anyone would come. Krylon was in a remote part of the galaxy, far from any known allies. They had been a peaceful, self-sufficient planet for so long that they never imagined needing help from outsiders. Vilas looked out through the window of the control tower. The alien ships were still there, looming above the destroyed city. He could hear the faint hum of their engines, a constant reminder of the threat they faced. Every so often, one of the ships would fire another blast at what little remained of the city, just to remind them of the enemy's power. "Why is this happening?" Vilas muttered under his breath. He couldn't understand it. The Krillians had never harmed anyone. They had no enemies, so why were they being attacked? As he stood there, lost in thought, the screen in front of him suddenly beeped. Dran rushed over. "Commander, we're getting a response," he exclaimed, his eyes wide with surprise. Vilas' heart skipped a beat. He moved quickly to the console and pressed a button to open the incoming message. The screen flickered, and then, in a language they had never seen before, a message appeared. "It's in a foreign language," Dran said, his voice trembling with hope and confusion. Vilas stared at the message. Though he couldn't read it, the fact that someone had responded meant that their call had been heard. "Run it through the translator," he ordered. Dran worked quickly, inputting the message into their translation system. After a few moments, the words appeared on the screen in Krillian. "This is Earth. We have received your distress call. Help is on the way." Vilas felt a wave of relief wash over him. Earth. He had heard of Earth in the ancient records, but they had never had contact with them before. From what he knew, Earth was a planet filled with a strong but unpredictable species called humans. They were known for their will to survive, no matter what challenges they faced. Could these humans really be the help Krylon needed? "Earth," Vilas whispered, still processing the message. "They're coming to help us." Dran blinked in disbelief. "Humans, they're coming." "It appears so," Vilas replied, though a part of him was still uncertain. He had always thought of humans as a violent, unpredictable race. But now, they were Krylon's only hope. He had no choice but to trust them. The message continued. "Prepare for our arrival. We will do everything we can to help." Vilas read the words carefully. He knew the situation was still dangerous. The enemy ships were relentless, and there was no telling how long it would take for the humans to arrive. Still, it was the first sign of hope they'd had since the attack began. "How long until they reach us?" Vilas asked. Dran checked the coordinates. At their current speed, it could take them a few hours, maybe more. Vilas frowned. We need to buy more time. He turned to his officers. Send another message to Earth. Let them know we are still under heavy attack. Tell them to hurry. Thran quickly began typing the message, while Vilas focused on the enemy ships once more. They had already destroyed most of the city. If the humans didn't arrive soon, there might be nothing left to save. Commander, should we try to distract the enemy? One of his officers asked. Vilas thought for a moment. They had no weapons strong enough to fight back, but they couldn't just sit and wait for the invaders to destroy everything. Yes, he said finally, but be careful. We can't afford to lose more lives. As the Krillians prepared to take action, Vilas allowed himself a moment of cautious hope. Help was on the way. The humans were coming. But would they arrive in time? Outside, the enemy ships hovered ominously, their weapons still aimed at the planet below. The Krillians were not safe yet, but now they had a glimmer of hope, a glimmer that someone out there was willing to fight for them. The fate of Krylon now rested in the hands of the humans, and all Vilas could do was wait. The human team prepares. On board the Earth spaceship Atlas, the human rescue team moved quickly through the narrow corridors. They had just received the final confirmation from the Krillians. The situation was worse than they had expected. The alien planet was under heavy attack, and there was little time left. Captain Adrian Hayes stood in the command center, staring at the holo map of Krylon on the screen in front of him. The planet was beautiful, with lush green landscapes and calm blue oceans, but that peace had been shattered. Red marks flashed over the map, showing where the enemy had hit the hardest. Hayes took a deep breath. All right, team, he said, turning to face his squad. We've got a tough mission ahead of us. Krylon is in chaos. They're being attacked by a force they can't stop, and it's our job to help them. The soldiers in front of him, all wearing the latest combat gear, nodded in silence. They were some of Earth's finest, smart, tough, and ready for anything. Each one of them knew the risks of this mission. Krylon was far from Earth, and they didn't know much about the enemy they were going to face. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, Hayes' second in command, stepped forward. We're working with limited intel, Captain. The Krillians don't have much on these invaders. All we know is that their tech is advanced, way beyond what the Krillians can handle. Hayes nodded. That's true. But we're humans, and we've been through worse before. We may not have the most advanced tech, but we've got experience, and we know how to think on our feet. The team exchanged determined looks. Earth had faced many challenges in the past, from planetary wars to interstellar threats, but they had always come out stronger. This mission was no different. They were going in to help, no matter the odds. Do we know how many enemy ships we're dealing with? One of the soldiers, Private Kim, asked. Mitchell pulled up the latest scan of the area. So far, we've detected at least 5 large enemy ships hovering over Krylon's main city, but there could be more. These invaders are fast and efficient. They've already leveled most of the city. Private Diaz, the team's weapons specialist, cracked his knuckles. 5 ships doesn't sound too bad. We can handle that. Hayes smiled slightly but stayed focused. This isn't about taking down the ships, Diaz. Our priority is to protect the Krillians and get them to safety. We'll engage the enemy if we have to, but saving lives comes first. Mitchell nodded. The Krillians aren't soldiers like us. They don't have weapons, and they've never had to fight before. They've been peaceful for centuries. Hayes' expression grew serious, which means they're scared. We need to show them that they're not alone in this fight. The team began gearing up for the mission. Weapons were checked, communication devices were tested, and each soldier made sure their suit's armor was in place. The energy rifles they carried weren't the most advanced in the galaxy, but they were reliable, and that's what mattered most. Hayes looked over at his crew as they prepared. They were ready, as always, but there was a sense of urgency this time. They had heard the Krillians' distress call, and they all knew what was at stake. An entire planet's population was depending on them. "Captain, we're approaching Krylon's atmosphere," the pilot called from the front of the ship. Hayes walked over to the window and stared out into space. The planet Krylon appeared in the distance, growing larger as the Atlas sped toward it. The red flashes of explosions could be seen even from this far out. His heart tightened. He knew they were walking into a dangerous situation, but there was no turning back now. "We'll be landing soon," Hayes said, turning back to his team. "Here's the plan. We split into two groups. One group will help evacuate the Krillians to safer areas. The other will set up defenses around the city. We'll try to hold off the invaders until we can figure out a way to stop them." Mitchell looked at the map. "Where do you want me, Captain?" "You'll lead the evacuation team, Lieutenant," Hayes said. "Take Diaz and Kim with you. Your job is to get as many Krillians out of the city as possible. Use the shelters, but keep them moving. We don't know how long those shelters will hold up." Mitchell nodded, ready for the task. Hayes continued, "I'll lead the defense team. We'll set up around the central plaza and use whatever we can to create barriers. We'll try to slow the enemy down." As the team finished their preparations, the Atlas began its descent into Krylon's atmosphere. The ship shook slightly as it passed through the clouds, heading straight toward the war-torn city below. The lights of the enemy ships grew larger and brighter, casting eerie shadows over the planet. "All right, team," Hayes said, his voice steady but firm. "It's time to show these Krillians what humans are made of." The soldiers gripped their weapons tightly, their faces set with determination. They knew this was going to be one of their toughest missions yet, but they were ready. As the Atlas landed on the ground, the team rushed out, their hearts racing with adrenaline. The fate of Krylon was in their hands now. First fight with the enemy. The human rescue team had barely stepped off the Atlas when they were met with the sounds of destruction. The once peaceful city of Krylon was in ruins. Buildings lay in heaps of rubble, fires burned uncontrollably, and the air was thick with smoke. The few Krillians still in the streets were running in terror, trying to escape the enemy ships hovering overhead. Captain Hayes quickly surveyed the scene. "This is worse than we thought," he muttered. He could hear the distant roar of the enemy ship's engines as they circled above, watching and waiting. The invaders hadn't spotted them yet, but it wouldn't take long. "Team, move out," Hayes ordered, his voice firm and calm. "Mitchell, get the Krillians to safety. Diaz, Kim, cover her. The rest of you with me. We'll set up a defensive line here." Lieutenant Mitchell nodded, leading her group towards the nearest shelter where Krillians were huddled, afraid and confused. "Come on, we're here to help," she shouted to the frightened aliens. "We'll get you to safety." Meanwhile, Hayes and his team took position in the city's central plaza. It was once a beautiful place with fountains and gardens, but now it was a war zone. They quickly used whatever they could find, broken walls, debris, and vehicles, to create makeshift barriers. Private Diaz, holding his energy rifle tight, glanced nervously at the sky. "Captain, those enemy ships are going to notice us soon. What do we do when they attack?" Hayes checked his rifle, his face serious. "We fight back." Before anyone could respond, a deafening sound filled the air. One of the massive enemy ships had spotted them. It hovered closer, its dark, sleek body blocking out the sun. Then, with a loud hum, it fired. "Take cover," Hayes shouted. A bright beam of energy slammed into the ground just feet away, sending chunks of concrete flying through the air. The soldiers dove behind their barriers, barely avoiding the blast. Dust and smoke filled the air as the ground shook beneath them. Hayes gritted his teeth. "Open fire. We need to show them we're not going down without a fight." The humans rose from their cover, aiming their rifles at the ship. Bright blue energy blasts shot out from their weapons, striking the enemy ship's hull. Sparks flew as the energy beams hit, but the ship barely slowed. Its dark metal exterior seemed nearly impenetrable. Private Kim cursed under her breath. These things are tough. Keep firing, Hayes ordered. We've got to find a weak spot. The soldiers continued to fire, pouring everything they had into the attack. The enemy ship responded by unleashing another wave of energy blasts, shaking the ground with each hit. The humans dodged and rolled, moving quickly to avoid the deadly beams. Amid the chaos, Hayes noticed something. There was a slight flicker near the base of the ship's engines. It was subtle, but it was there. That's it, he thought. That's its weakness. Focus your fire on the engines, Hayes shouted. There's a weak spot there. The team adjusted their aim, targeting the ship's engines. The next round of blasts hit the mark, and this time, the ship shook violently. Sparks flew, and the ship's hum grew louder, almost like a scream. You've got it, Diaz yelled, grinning. It's working. But the fight wasn't over yet. The enemy ship retaliated with a massive blast, sending debris flying in every direction. One of the soldiers was thrown back, hitting the ground hard. Hayes ran over and pulled him behind cover. You all right? He asked, checking the soldier's injuries. The soldier nodded weakly, though his face was pale with shock. I'll live, Captain. Hayes gave a sharp nod and returned to the fight. The team kept firing at the enemy ship's engines, determined to bring it down. The ship's movements grew erratic, sparks flying from its damaged systems. It was losing control. Suddenly, with a loud crack, the ship's engines exploded. The massive vessel shuddered, tilting to one side before crashing to the ground with a thunderous boom. Dust and debris shot into the air, and the ground shook violently from the impact. The humans lowered their weapons, breathing heavily. The enemy ship lay in ruins, smoke rising from its shattered hull. We did it, Kim said, wiping sweat from her brow. We actually took it down. Hayes didn't smile. His eyes remained fixed on the sky. That was just one ship, he said quietly. There are more out there. The team nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. They had won the first fight, but the battle was far from over. Just then, Lieutenant Mitchell's voice crackled over the comms. Captain, we've got the Krillians to the shelters, but we've got a problem. More enemy ships are moving in fast. Hayes clenched his jaw. He knew it was only a matter of time before the next wave hit. All right, he said into his comms. Get ready for the next round. We're not done yet. The humans stood tall, their weapons ready, as the distant hum of the enemy ships grew louder once again. The first fight was over, but the war for Krylon had only just begun. The team concentrated their fire on the weakened ship, and within moments, it exploded in a shower of metal and flame. The wreckage crashed to the ground, sending up a cloud of dust. That's one down. Diaz yelled triumphantly. Let's get the rest. But the remaining enemy ships weren't going to go down so easily. They retaliated with a barrage of energy blasts, forcing the humans to dive for cover. The ground shook violently as explosions rocked the area. We can't take much more of this, Kim shouted over the noise, her voice filled with panic. Hayes gritted his teeth, thinking fast. They were outnumbered, and their weapons weren't strong enough to take on the entire fleet. But humans had one thing that no one else did: adaptability. And Hayes was about to use that to their advantage. Diaz, Kim, follow me, Hayes barked. We're going to get closer to the lid ship. If we can take out its command center, the rest might retreat. With no time to waste, the trio sprinted through the wreckage, dodging enemy fire as they made their way toward the largest ship. It was a massive vessel, far more advanced than anything Earth had, but Hayes had noticed something during the earlier fight: a weakness in its defenses near the control tower. As they reached the base of the ship, Hayes pointed to the weak spot. There, we need to plant explosives. That should take it down. Diaz nodded and quickly began setting up the charges, while Kim provided cover fire. The enemy ships were still raining down blasts, but they hadn't noticed the humans sneaking in below. Hurry up, Diaz. Kim shouted as another explosion rocked the ground nearby. Almost done, Diaz replied, his fingers working quickly. Finally, the charges were set. Clear out, Hayes ordered. They ran as fast as they could, diving behind a broken wall just as the explosives went off. The blast was enormous. The entire control tower of the lead ship collapsed in on itself, and the ship shuddered violently. Without its command center, the vessel began to lose altitude, spiraling out of control. It's going down. Diaz cheered, watching as the massive ship crashed to the ground with a deafening roar. The remaining enemy ships hesitated. Without their leader, they seemed disoriented. After a few moments, they turned and retreated, vanishing into the sky. The humans had done it. They had turned the battle around. Breathing heavily, Hayes stood up, looking at the wreckage of the lead ship. "We're not done yet," he said, but there was a spark of hope in his voice now. They had shown the enemy what humans were capable of. Aliens joined the fight. After the humans had taken down the lead enemy ship, a wave of hope swept through the remaining Krillians in the shelters. They had watched as the strange but brave humans fought off their attackers. Now they could see that the humans were not just here to help. They were fighting for their lives, just like the Krillians. Lieutenant Mitchell stood guard outside the shelter, her heart racing with both fear and pride. "We've got to get these people ready to fight," she said to her team. "They can't just hide while we do all the work." One of the Krillians, a tall alien with blue skin and shimmering eyes, stepped forward. "We want to help," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Our people have always fought to protect our home." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? This is dangerous." The Krillian nodded firmly. "We may not have much experience, but we know our city. We can help you defend it." Seeing the determination in the alien's eyes, Mitchell felt a spark of hope. "All right, let's make a plan. We'll need to show the enemy that Krylon is not weak. Together, we can drive them out." As Mitchell gathered the Krillians, Captain Hayes and his team approached. "What's happening here?" he asked. "Lieutenant Mitchell is training the Krillians to fight," one of the soldiers replied. "They want to join us." Hayes nodded, a look of approval on his face. "Good. We'll need all the help we can get." Mitchell began explaining to the Krillians how to use the energy weapons the humans had brought. "It's simple," she said, demonstrating the basic controls. "Just aim and pull the trigger. Remember, keep your heads down and stay behind cover." The Krillians listened carefully, eager to learn. Some had never held a weapon before, but their fear turned into determination. They wanted to protect their home. Meanwhile, Hayes surveyed the area, looking for the next move. The enemy ships were still out there, but they were regrouping, likely planning their next attack. He knew they wouldn't wait long. "All right, listen up," Hayes called out, addressing both humans and Krillians. "We've got to set up a defensive perimeter. We need to cover the entrances to the shelter and create a safe zone for the civilians. Let's work together." The Krillians moved with purpose, using their knowledge of the city to create barricades and cover. They worked alongside the humans, sharing ideas and strategies. The unity between them grew stronger as they prepared for the next battle. As they finished setting up defenses, a loud rumble echoed through the sky. The enemy ships were returning. Hayes and Mitchell quickly organized everyone, ensuring that the Krillians were ready. "Remember what we practiced," Mitchell shouted, her voice strong. "Stay together and focus on your targets." The humans took their positions, their rifles aimed at the sky. The Krillians stood beside them, holding the energy weapons tightly. They were nervous, but they felt a sense of purpose. They were no longer just victims. They were fighters. As the enemy ships descended, a sense of tension filled the air. The humans and Krillians waited for the command to fire. The lead ship opened fire first, a bright beam of energy shooting down toward the ground. "Now," Hayes shouted. The humans and Krillians opened fire together. Energy beams shot up at the enemy ships, hitting their targets. The Krillians surprised themselves with their accuracy as they worked together with the humans. One of the enemy ships was hit, and it began to spiral out of control. The Krillians cheered, their confidence growing with each successful shot. "Keep it up," Mitchell called out, her eyes shining with determination. "We're making a difference." The enemy ships retaliated, firing back at the humans and Krillians. Explosions erupted around them, but they held their ground. They were united in their fight for survival. Hayes spotted a group of enemy ships regrouping to attack from the flank. "They're trying to surround us," he yelled. "Mitchell, take half the Krillians and cut them off. We need to break their formation." Mitchell nodded and quickly gathered a group of Krillians. "Follow me. We'll flank them from the left." The Krillians followed Mitchell, their hearts pounding but full of resolve. They moved quickly, positioning themselves behind the enemy ships. Just as they were ready to strike, the enemy turned their weapons toward the humans. "Now," Mitchell shouted, "open fire." Energy blasts filled the air as they launched their surprise attack. The enemy was caught off guard, and one of their ships exploded in a fiery blast. The humans cheered, their spirits lifted. But the fight was far from over. The remaining enemy ships began to regroup, and the battle raged on. Hayes and Mitchell fought alongside the Krillians, their hearts pounding with adrenaline. They had come together as one force, fighting to protect their home. As the battle continued, it became clear that the Krillians were no longer helpless. They were warriors, fighting for their planet alongside the humans. Together, they would show the enemy that they would not back down. The tide of the battle was turning, and with each victory, the bond between the humans and Krillians grew stronger. They were united, and they were ready to fight until the very end.